Wow. Hi. I'm very glad you all came. It's a great honor to be included among all the authors, editors, and friends of Silhouettes 1 and 2 and its prequel, The Significant Anthology. I wish I could be here in person with you all as I embark upon the first ever launching of my first ever books. They are self-published books, but everyone has to begin somewhere. And it is probably appropriate, and in my mind necessary, to offer a word of thanks to all with whom I have come into contact along this journey, walking through the experiences of life. And specifically, if I were visible right now, I would give a great big nod of gratitude to Dr. A.V. Koshy, virtual fellow voyager during much of my recent growth as an author, and host of this book launch today. Maybe I can pause, and you all can clap for me. As writers, as artists, as thinkers in this world of change and challenges, we are constantly in the very odd position of defending our choices, our actions, our careers. And for those of us who prefer to express and explain ourselves through our work, through the vibrant presentation of our art, this can be both terrifying and invigorating. At some level, we need to reevaluate our perspective given the vast predicaments people and the planet as a whole face now. How can you write about nature, about the innocence and dreams of youth, about the comfort of traditions and memories of the elders, when the world seems about to implode from the inroads of environmental decay, profiteering in politics, social erosion? How can we write with a sense of wonder when faced with a world exploding with crime, violence, and war? I don't know how exactly. I live, I stay, and I look, and I rage, and I paint, and I sing, and I write a poem or a paragraph. I try to move beyond the utility of language and the futility of life, and fuse my art into possibility for something more, for hope, maybe. In my writing, there are few answers. I try always to express the details of life as I have seen it, as I experience it. I try never to turn away from the uncomfortable inadequacies and small human truths of violence, racism, of the myriad deaths of our finite bodies, of the inestimable, exquisite potential of what might be our infinite souls. I may wander in the darkness. We all may. But we may also search for light. And in that searching, there are so many questions. Sometimes so many questions, you can't bootstrap yourself out of them. So I guess the main thing in my writing, in all my art, is that I kick off the boots. I walk barefooted through the mud, the broken glass, the rat-infested alleyways, the grass, the occasional flowers that life presents. I may not always present answers, but I offer an invitation. When life presses too closely, I invite you to kick off your boots, to come out, as you were born, in all your humanness. What was it that Bob Dylan said? You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. In my art, in my books, there are many storms. I seem to live in constant storms. Maybe you do too. And we may not know all the answers. We may have nothing but questions. But if we live in a world of storms and savagery, hiding won't fix it. If it is going to rain, we can still ask questions and search for answers together, despite the storms. We can kick off the boots of conformity and dance together in the rain, in the storms, and in those quiet hours when darkness gives way to sunrise. I would like to read excerpts from the 3 books I am launching here today, a few poems, a bit of prose narration. I'll put the words on the screen so you can follow along, because we all use our own pronunciations when we read inside our minds. I'd like to begin by reading 2 of the poems from my first self-published book, A Modest Menu. A multi-genre compilation of prose, poetry, and a few essays, which look at poverty, hunger, food security, and violence through the lens of art, rather than flowcharts, policy statements, and journalism. The poems are titled Sight and Souls. Sight. Deep voices, not loud, but not held quiet, spoke of something, sound floating from behind barbed tree barriers along a darkened roadway. Intersection glaring headlights of cars, hastening to lighted spaces, food, a change of clothes. Babies soothed, slings holding tight, mothers shielding with one hand against the noise and bright, toddlers tight-knit, looking on, stoplight signal, time to stand, eyes silent, asking if windows roll down. Difficult to be a man among men all without work, unable to feed beautiful wives and children, deep voices falling silent while the cars are still. Difficult to be mothers, all too briefly young, with children to feed and with men, strength lost with waiting, but needing still to be reminded that silent eyes see them as they hope to be. Souls. Walk along a traveled road, searched and scoured for every coin or scrap with value, where dreams are tied to the soles of shoes. Shoes, worn and broken, stuffed with cardboard and patched with cloth, or taped, or bound with cast-off bits of rubber or plastic found in fields. Sometimes even old tires with thongs are too expensive, and there are no shoes at all, just feet with pads cracked and hard, like those of streetwise dogs and hunting cats, sharp of eye, fleet and silent, in pursuit of meager survival. One more day of walking, hungry, thirsty, under skies hot with sun, or cold with dark of night, and dark of eyes turned far from sight of any needing shoes. My next book, A Holiday Carol, is, as its title states, a modern interpretation of Dickens' A Christmas Carol, exploring the anonymity of tweets and selfies, the dislocation of refugee and marginalized populations, the violence of dependencies, exclusion, and war, with which we beguile ourselves into thinking that armoring ourselves with the commodities of life will make death any less permanent. In situations well seasoned with humor and hope, in keeping with Dickens' own traditions. With due honor to Charles Dickens, I would like to read to you my excerpt from Chapter 5, the second of the three spirits. Then, without a word of warning from the ghost, they stood upon a cold and wind-swept hilltop where masses of huge stones were strewn about, and tents clustered along a fence and in straggling rows, and a few tilting poles held knots and webbings of wires, and a rusty pipe's faucet dripped brownish water into a plastic bucket balanced beneath it. Down off in the west, the retreating sun had forgotten its last streak of sullen red, but there, it was snatched below the horizon, and the dark gloom of night fell, waiting, breathless, for stars. "What place is this?" asked Scrivel. "A place for refugees, fleeing the wars they did not start, and cannot hope to finish," returned the spirit. "They come from all walks of life, wealthy and poor, educated and subsisting, but they have faith, they have dreams, and in some guise they all know me, and the spirit of hope and of giving." A light shone from the flap of one tent, which was huddled close against a barrier wall of mud and stone, and yet still barely stood against the bleak wind blowing across the settlement, but which held out some of the cold, and set the light glowing around those within. An old, old man and woman, with their children and their children's children, and another generation beyond that, clustered around a small lamp on a worn woven rug. Music played from some device unseen, and some hummed, and they told stories, and shared their small store of happiness with memories and prayers for a future which might find them together and safe. The ghost passed his torch across the scene, and the soft chorus of their voices seemed to raise in spirit and in fellowship, and the light seemed to brighten, and a timelessness filled the space where they sat there together. The spirit did not tarry longer, but bidding Scrivel to tighten his grasp upon the green robe, passed over seas and great chains of mountains, to where men mined for teakwood, and an ancient forest beneath a great lake. Even here, where small raised huts sheltered families of elders and the strong muscled divers, young wives and children who would form the new generation, the spirit paused, raising his torch in salute and as gift to the people of faith and hope, sharing their food, time, and love as they could. The third book I will briefly present to you during today's launch is Blue Wings Unfolding, a novel exploring the challenges of neurodiversity, the complexities and tragedies of life, all through the eyes of Jaylee, a youthful spirit on the cusp of adulthood. I'd like to read to you some of Jaylee's experiences with learning to drive, excerpted from Chapter 15 of the book. Next class, the teacher had us taking turns getting on the highway, accelerating up to the posted speeds, and getting off at the next exit, in order to loop around for the next student's turn. I noticed, silently, that the teacher pulled on his ceiling handle very little, since he had both hands on the steering wheel, and his foot on the second set of controls ready to engage for both the other students' excursions. He had things to say, but he steeled himself to utter only supportive hints while they drove onto and off of the highway. Soon enough, the car was parked once again in the school lot, and it was my turn to buckle into the driver's seat. I did so silently and swiftly, as the teacher was preoccupied with reciting a list of observations and instructions to the other two students, who were now occupying the back seat of the driver's ed vehicle. I rolled out of the lot using the appropriate signal to turn onto the main road. I stopped at the stoplight. The teacher was still talking. I proceeded to approach the highway on-ramp, again employing the turn signal before leaving the road for the entry ramp. I was not driving particularly quickly, but the teacher was still turned around to face the other students. I didn't have the heart to interrupt him when he was in such a good flow. So I quietly went around my business, upholding all the safety tips I'd gleaned from my practice with the rangers at the state park, while the teacher was still focused on the back seat, talking with great intensity. The other two students did not bat an eyelash. They wanted some fun, and were perfectly happy to let the teacher keep his head and attention turned away from the road, so he could face them while he continued to talk from his front seat, oblivious to my actions. The posted speed was, at this straight portion of the highway, 60 miles per hour. I slowed at the base of the on-ramp, blissfully aware that there was no need to shift the gears or clutch mechanisms to quickly access the power of the automatic transmission car. I allowed a line of slow-moving, heavily loaded tractor-trailer trucks to continue past me along the slower speed entrance lane, and calmly kept my signal light on, cars lining up behind me, also waiting for the convoy to pass. The teacher was still facing back towards the students, who very helpfully asked him questions to keep him occupied. The second all the tractor-trailer trucks had passed and I saw daylight and open road beckoning just ahead on the entrance lane, my foot was on that accelerator faster than corn pops in a hot pan, and we were off. I held the lane for a brief span, and then I flicked on my left turn signal again to move into the passing lane, since the heavily loaded trucks ahead of our line of traffic in the slower right-hand lane were moving only at about 45 miles per hour. I passed them all at the speed limit and with plenty of clearance, and smoothly signaled a right turn to move back into the slow side lane again, in preparation for taking the exit ramp up and off the highway, which we were approaching fairly rapidly now that I was driving at an efficient 55 miles per hour. It was almost as if I was a real driver in a real car, not a student with a learner's permit, in a car which bore a lighted student driver sign up on its roof, and a "Don't try to hire this car" parody of a taxicab. A few of the cars, which had followed me from the entrance ramp onto the highway and out into the passing lane, beeped their horns brightly, waving encouragingly at us, as I drove at adult world speeds in our little yellow sign driver's ed car. I kept both hands on the wheel, but the students in the back seat waved back to the friendly passing cars, and the driver's ed teacher turned his eyes towards the front windshield just in time to see me decelerate and switch off the turn signal as I moved on to the exit ramp. The last of the entrance ramp cars drove by, waving and honking, and the driver's ed teacher took a breath, opened his mouth, closed it again, and put one hand firmly on the teacher's steering wheel. With his other hand, maybe because he couldn't think of anything to say and wanted to fill the void of silence, he reached over and turned on the radio. The car filled with the sounds of Sia's Unstoppable. Cool. My first song, the first time the radio was turned on while I drove a car. Almost made me want to roll down the windows, crank up the volume, and wave one hand in the air while I sang. Probably not a good idea in the driver's ed car, even if I did pull into the parking area and stop the car to do so. But it sure is a good song, and the horizons of my life seemed to expand. I grinned and drove sedately back to the school lot and parked the driver's ed car, radio playing all the way. Score one for the Rangers! And this concludes my book launch presentation. Time for me to depart, virtually at least. I hope you all get a chance to read and enjoy the books, and I look forward to writing more books and getting them out to be read. Thank you for listening.